Yeah, hi folks. Yes, UNESCO cynically tried to put the Great Barrier Reef on the endangered heritage list just prior to Boris Johnson's Glasgow summit. And all this time I thought Australia belonged to Australia. Now how naive I was. It belongs to the UN and a bunch of greenie zealots, or at least they think they own it. Have a look.
Well, let's go to another issue. A UN push to downgrade the Great Barrier Reef was designed to jolt countries into adopting more ambitious climate targets, according to a bombshell new report. It's been revealed that the campaign to list the reef as in danger was not masterminded by Beijing, as originally suspected, but by a posse of European bureaucrats and international green groups committed to climate goals far beyond the Paris Agreement. For more on this, I'm joined from Coffs Harbour in New South Wales by the Environment Editor at the Australian newspaper, Graham Lloyd. I tell you what, this is a very, I won't say surprising, because it's a conspiracy here, very clearly, an international green conspiracy, but it's pretty shocking. Is this all in train, Graham, ahead of the Glasgow summit?
This is all part of the Glasgow summit. And it's really part of an organised push to try and focus people on trying harder and doing more. And the Barrier Reef is really a global property that can really change people's minds and make them act. So the UN process, I think, has seen the reef as a great poster child to try and animate the meeting.
Exactly. Anyway, this is how the propaganda media spun this story.
This underwater trove of colourful reefs serve as refuge and habitat to some of the most diverse marine species on the planet. Australia's Great Barrier Reef boasts 1/3 of the world's coral population, but it's under threat, and so too is a wildlife that relies on it. The Eastern Pacific Ocean is heating up fast.
By how much? Give us a number.
Since the mid-90s, this has caused the death of half of the reef.
Half of the reef? Really?
And has led to UN officials recommending it to be placed on a list of World Heritage Sites considered in danger. But the Australian government isn't happy about it.
Countries, including European countries, have got strong views about what policies different countries should have on climate change. And I understand that as well. But this is not the convention in which to have those conversations.
Last year, the reef recorded its highest sea surface temperature since records began in 1900.
Again, she gives no numbers.
When the ocean heats up, corals expel algae that causes them to bleach. Only the most resilient survive. UNESCO has called for the in danger listing to be adopted at its next World Heritage Committee meeting, but it's the second time that it's tried to add it to the list. 6 years ago, the Australian government lobbied the 21-country committee to drop the listing. It said UNESCO didn't consider the billions of dollars it contributed towards the reef's protection. But some experts say Australia is resisting a commitment to the net zero carbon emissions level by 2050, and that its over-reliance on fossil fuels may be contributing to climate change.
That means making very definite decisions on climate change, not heading towards supporting the fossil fuel industry in this country and opening new coal mines, new gas developments. None of those things are going to help climate change, but also taking as much action as we possibly can on improving water quality for the Great Barrier Reef.
3,000 separate reefs and 900 islands make up the Great Barrier Reef. But with 50% of the reef already gone.
50% of the reef already gone? Really? Anyway, now to the truth.
Well, this won't come as a surprise to you, but tell us about the report and the claims that the reef is in a recovery window after a decade of disturbance.
Now, folks, I've posted a link to that below.
Yes, I love the phrase recovery window. This is data that's been accumulated over a little while now. And it shows actually, they don't actually show a graph showing this, but it's actually at record high coral cover. We've got more coral on the Great Barrier Reef now than we did when records began in 1985. We've got twice as much coral as we had after huge cyclones went through the reef in about 2011 and 12. And this record high coral cover is despite supposedly having 3 catastrophic, unprecedented bleaching events in just the last 5 years. So you just got to wonder, were those bleaching events maybe as catastrophic as these experts supposedly claimed? And has there been just a little bit of exaggeration?
Yes, just a little bit, 50%.
Over the last, actually 50 years, because these claims of the death of the Great Barrier Reef, you can read newspaper articles going back to the 1960s and 70s saying the reef is dying from crown of thorns starfish or whatever.
Well, Peter, here's your graph. We'll put it up of the record high coral growth since 1985, so I'll put that up. But do you think they're kind of a little bit reluctant to tell us the good news reading that report, or are they kind of astonished? What do you think it is?
Well, yeah, they're certainly a bit reluctant. I mean, it's excellent data, and AIMS need to be congratulated for doing this work over the last 35 years. But they make an excuse, you see. They say, oh, we are at record. Well, they don't actually say record high coral cover, but we are. But it's only because the fast-growing corals, the plate and the staghorn corals, have got going. This is why we're at this high state. But of course, when we were at our record low in the 2012, they forgot to say, well, actually, it's just the fast-growing corals that get killed by cyclones, and they're also the ones that bleach, and they're the ones that get hit by crown of thorns starfish. So when we got the record lows, they were saying, oh, well, if we go on at this rate, there'll be no coral left by 2025 or whatever date they pulled out. So there's a degree of inconsistency, and it's yet another example where environmental science organisations have just been exaggerating and being alarmist. It's sort of a bit of a resonance with the previous segment. This seems to be a very common theme amongst the so-called expert organisations. Can you really rely on them? It's a very great shame, but in the case of environmental organisations, generally, I don't think you can.
That's for sure.
Well, you've been vindicated. Hallelujah. And I'm seeing all those international outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, who were covering the decline of the reef are suddenly not covering this latest data that's come out. But I want to ask you about this plan of transplanting coral at the Great Barrier Reef to help it grow. Take us through that strategy. Why are they doing that? Is it effective?
Yeah, this is one of many examples where you sort of get the impression that maybe the scientists are starting to lose sense of reality, actually. They're actually planting corals. They're planting corals on the reef, supposedly to save it from climate change and all the rest of it. But look, the reef is the size of Victoria. It's big,
massive garden, isn't it?
Bigger than Germany. And there's no way you go, if the reef is going to die, it's going to die. You're not going to just be able to plant an area that size. And of course, it ignores the fact there are literally trillions of floating larvae that get produced every year. And, you know, I used to do a lot of work on the reef, putting instrumentation, instruments and various things out on the reef. And you found if you leave something out for more than a year or two, it just starts growing coral. You can't stop it growing coral. And they're kidding themselves thinking they're going to transplant the reef. It just really... You really do worry about whether anybody's actually hauling them into line and saying, is this practical? Does this make any sense whatsoever? And there are many other examples of that.
Well, I love the one, I was going to say, Peter, love the one you talked about instruments, but instruments of a different kind. Apparently they're playing music under the water to make the sounds of a healthy reef. So it's not music, but it's the sounds of a healthy reef underwater, kind of stuff, to make the fish think that the reef is healthier than it is or something. I mean, these people are crackers, aren't they?
Well, they're certainly playing sounds, and the idea is that these corals they've planted, they want to be able to attract fish that are swimming around the reef. And remember, a reef is about 1 kilometre or 3 in size, and the water's around it. There's all these little fish that home in on the reef on the sounds, and supposedly they're going to... I mean, you can just imagine it. This reef is going to have to be wired up with thousands of speakers to attract these poor little swimming fish, and these fish are going to hear this sound and they're going to swim towards this reef. And what are they going to find? Not a healthy reef. They're going to find a speaker. You've got to wonder whether the RSPCA has the RSPCA been told about it? Is this ethical? No.
James, quickly before we wrap. Yeah.
And I mean, what are they going to be playing for them? Is it Jimmy Buffett? Is it going to be
or Led Zeppelin, perhaps?
party music? They're going to say, "Come on down, have a margarita." And both those speakers in 2 years get covered up by coral and stop working anyway.
Well, precisely. It's not music. They make the sound of shrimps and various other things that reefs are noisy places. But you're right. These speakers and all this equipment will look like a lump of coral in about probably 3 to 4 years. You won't even be able to see the speaker. There'll be so much biological growth on it.
Peter Ridd, always great to chat to you. And as Rita pointed out, you have been thoroughly vindicated by this latest report. If only the world's media would pick up on it and congratulate you on your work and also recognise the reality of the healthiness of the Great Barrier Reef. Peter Ridd, thanks so much.
Now, folks, for those who don't know, Peter Ridd was fired from James Cook University for challenging the status quo in respect to science, much the same as YouTube is doing right now by censoring certain content regarding vaccines.